Oh yeah, and just to give you a heads up, we're recording the webinar. Um, just so you know, anything you say or do. Um, so yeah, thanks so much for tuning into this webinar. I'm not gonna be saying too much. My name's Kevin Petty. I've been on the Cooperatives First team since the fall of last year, and I'm one of six, seven of us at the Cooperatives First nonprofit that helps groups create co-ops across Western Canada. So BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and we're able to do that because we're funded by Federated Co-op um, through the cooperative retailing system. So we're able to offer helpful resources and help you get going because of this funding arrangement. I also would like to do a quick land acknowledgement. We're located on Treaty 6 territory. I grew up very close to where Treaty 4 was signed near Fort Capel. But we're based out of Saskatoon, Treaty 6 territory, home of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and Métis. We acknowledge that this land was not ceded, but the purpose of the treaties was to ensure the land would be shared. Indigenous people have been cooperating in these territories for thousands of years, and it's through cooperation that all our communities will continue to thrive. I think with all of that, I think I'm ready to introduce our speaker. I'm very excited to share with you Lindsay Harris from Propolis Housing Cooperative in Kamloops, BC. I had the opportunity to chat with her in November in Kamloops, and I was very inspired by kind of a first of its kind in Canada housing co-op. Lindsay and her team have done a ton of work and figured out a lot of things since the 2020 when they incorporated. I really appreciate Lindsay taking the time to share with us what her group has learned. I think affordable housing is such a big need. You all know, and I think her story, she has a lot that really might help some people here. So, thank you all for joining. And I'm not going to say anything else. Here's Lindsay Harris with Propolis Housing Cooperative from Kamloops.
Thanks so much for that introduction, Kevin. And it's so wonderful to have so many folks here. I am so pleased to be able to share our story, and I do really hope that you'll find lots inspiring in the work that we've done. I am gonna share my screen because I do have a presentation to share with everyone. Um, and I want to start by acknowledging that Propolis is located on the unceded territory of the Secwepemc people here in Kamloops, BC, and we really view the work that we're doing, building cooperative, sustainable housing, as part of the way that we're learning to be good guests on this land. And we're so grateful and always learning from the way that the Secwepemc peoples have stewarded these lands for thousands of years. So I'm going to introduce you to who Propolis is, tell you a little bit about our organization. I'll tell you a little bit about the housing project that we're building, and then I'm going to tell you about our community bond campaign. And I hope that I'll leave lots of time for questions and dialogue after I share a little bit about our story. So, Propolis is a new nonprofit housing co-op. We incorporated in 2020, as Kevin mentioned, with a mandate to develop affordable, sustainable, net zero multifamily buildings in Kamloops. And we say over the coming decades because our goal has really been all along to build a model that's replicable. We are in the planning process for our first development, which will be located at 422 Trunk Hill Road in Kamloops. But the goal is really to build multiple buildings over time, and so we've sort of set out with that long-term task for our organization. And so much of what you'll hear me talk about is related to the first project, but building a foundation for what we hope is more housing to come. So if you're familiar with the term propolis, you know that it comes. It's a nature metaphor that we love. Propolis is the resinous mixture that's produced by honeybees to fill the gaps in a beehive. And so we're so inspired by this metaphor. We want to build a community where nobody falls through the cracks, where everyone has access to the homes that they need. And so our mission is building affordable, durable green homes that are going to contribute to growing vibrant neighborhoods here in Kamloops. The way that we like to share the goal that we're working towards is through looking at these interconnected concepts. We think that when we are working towards building lasting affordability through community ownership, we're building sustainable and resilient homes that are durable, adaptable, and future-proofed. We're addressing the problems of the lack of connection and cohesion that we have in our community by creating spaces for joyful connection, mutual support, and shared voice, ways for people to actually participate meaningfully in the homes that they live in. And when we show that this model can be scaled and replicated, both in our community and in other communities across the country, then we know that we're tackling the root causes of the housing crisis. Right now, is being treated as an investment for profit and not as a human right, and that's something that we really want to change. We want to build a community where everyone has access to the homes that they need. So I'll tell you a little bit about our property. For 422 Trunkill Road. It's approximately 1,500 meter square property that's located right in the heart of Kamloops North Shore. This has traditionally been a very vibrant and affordable neighborhood. And there's a lot of development and even like gentrification that's happening in this neighborhood. So we really want to contribute to seeing that neighborhood develop in a good way that doesn't displace people and that brings more affordability to that neighborhood. We purchased this piece of property in March of 2024, thanks to our successful community bond campaign, where we raised $1.1 million from just over 100 community investors. The property does have an existing commercial building on the site. And so we've had 3 commercial tenants in that building, which has allowed us to hold the property sustainably while we're in the pre-development and planning phase for the housing. So here's a picture of what we're planning to see to build on the site. It'll be a 6-story mixed-use apartment building with 53 residential units. We're building lots of flexible amenity spaces into the building, lots of spaces for community connection, co-working, workshop space, some food security initiatives, bike storage. We'll have rooftop gardens that will have fruit trees and berries and herbs and other things that will contribute to food security for folks that live in the building. And we'll also have 2 small commercial units on the ground level. And we're really excited about that kind of mixed use concept and the wanting to build a building that contributes to a neighborhood that's walkable, where people have amenities that are close by. And so even though it's been a challenge to be able to incorporate those commercial units into the project, it was really a value that we brought, that we were very committed to doing that. So I know that this is a cooperatives focused group, so I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but just in case folks aren't familiar with the co-op housing model, I wanted to give a quick overview of that. Because we are building specifically nonprofit co-op housing, which is a little bit different than the equity co-op housing model. So a nonprofit housing co-op owned and operated democratically by their members. Residents purchase a low barrier membership share. For us, that's set at $2,000. They'll pay a monthly housing fee. They'll enjoy secure long-term tenancy for as long as they want their unit. And our nonprofit co-op housing is provided at cost. So we'll be setting rents for the building at the cost to construct and operate it with no profit markup. Um, and of course, one of the major benefits is that this creates long-term permanent affordability for folks. And our housing fees will become more affordable over time relative to income. And so here's a visualization of what that looks like. When we first open the building, our rents will be just sort of marginally below market, because it does indeed cost quite a lot to construct new housing in this current environment. So, we'll do the best that we can on affordable construction while also balancing our goals of building sustainable housing and investing in, good life cycle costs for the building. So we're currently in at the stage of like doing that dance with our consultant team and architect and our contractor, to be as prudent as we can with our construction costs. But regardless, our rents will be set at just marginally below market when we first open the building. But this visualization shows, over the course of a 50-year mortgage or the 60 years of operating the building, you can expect that market rents are going to accelerate quite significantly, while our co-op rents are going to get increasingly more affordable as time goes on. I think it's also worth noting that this like depth of affordability that we're building over time. We have the long-term goal of investing in more housing and building more housing over time and growing the portfolio that our organization offers. And so so part of the mix here is that we're creating housing that's going to get more affordable over time, but we're also intending to build a portfolio of housing that we can leverage to build the next building and then the next building as the equity of what the nonprofit co-op owns and operates grows over time. So let me tell you a little bit about community bonds, because this has been a really instrumental part of how we've gotten Propolis off the ground. This diagram comes from Tapestry Community Capital. If you haven't heard of their name before, I absolutely recommend that you check them out. Tapestry supported Propolis through our community bond campaign, and they are one of the strongest advocate voices for community bonds across the country. Tapestry has been, they're a nonprofit organization, and they've supported nonprofits and co-ops across Canada, to do community bonds over the last decade or so. And Propolis has been their first campaign in Western Canada, and I really hope that there are more to follow. So a community bond functions much like a traditional bond does. It's a loan with a fixed term and a fixed rate of interest. So the process is that a community member buys a bond. Propolis, as the affordable housing provider, we finance our project. We repay our community investors. And then ideally, this becomes a self-perpetuating cycle where investors can reinvest when their bond matures. Um, and so that's sort of the general flow of how the process unfolds. This is what the Propolis bond terms looked like. When we went out to the community, we offered three different bond series, targeted to different levels that community members could invest at. We had our Worker Bee bond series, which had a really, pretty low barrier to entry, a $1,000 investment minimum. We really wanted to set a low investment minimum where, pretty much anyone in the community with a small amount of disposable income to invest would be invited and able to invest with us at that level. And that series had a 2.5% interest rate. All of our three series had a 3-year term, and all of them had the condition that interest would be repaid at maturity. Then we had our Queen Bee series with a $5,000 investment minimum and a 3% interest rate, and then the Apiary series with a $10,000 minimum and a 3.5% interest rate. So you can see that our interest rates were actually quite low. In June of 2023, when we launched the campaign, interest rates had been rising significantly at that time. So we did the planning and feasibility study for this series, and we did investor consultations. in the 6 months prior to launching the campaign, and economy changed significantly at that time. So I'll touch on that a little bit more later. But just noting, at this point we had relatively low interest rates for the offering. Here's a visual of the timeline of our campaign. We launched in June of 2023. The campaign was open for a period of 21 months, and we completed in March of 2025, having raised the target of 1.1 million. In March of 2024, that was the deadline that we had to purchase our property. And by that point, we had successfully raised about 50% of the bond campaign. And so we purchased the property using that 50% of the bond campaign that we had raised, plus two bridge loans from Thrive Impact Fund and the Canadian Cooperative Investment Fund. And so it was pretty innovative to sort of stack the bonds and those two impact loans. But we were really grateful to both Thrive and CCIF for stepping in a really instrumental way to allow us to move forward with the property purchase, and then with that bridge lending, allow us more time to raise the remainder of the bond campaign, and to pay down those bridge loans as we completed the rest of the campaign. So, following the purchase of the property in March, in fall of 2024, we were able to announce two large anchor investments, one from affordable housing societies who invested $100,000 in the campaign, and another from First West Credit Union who invested $250,000 in the campaign. And that's a really significant contribution. It was the first direct investment in an impact project that First West had ever done. And to my knowledge, I believe it's the largest direct investment by a credit union in a community bond campaign to date. So if you're considering community bond campaigns, credit unions are incredible partners. And then shortly before the campaign closed in March of 2025, we launched a pilot partnership with 5 community foundations in our region who put in a matched investment, pooled their investment, and raised a total of $100,000 across 5 community foundations, which brought us to the finish line of the campaign. And so again, community foundations are really excellent partners in a community bond raise. Here are a few statistics about who invested in the campaign. We had 101 unique investors. The overwhelming majority of them were individuals, and then we had 12 organizations or businesses. And primarily our investors came from BC, and a majority of them came from Kamloops. So this is a really hyper local campaign. 63 from Kamloops, 30 were from the rest of BC, and we had 8 investors from Ontario. Here's the split of the distribution of who invested in what series. We had just over 30% investing in worker bee bonds at $1,000 a piece, 42% invested in the apiary bonds, and just about 25% in the queen bee series. So a little bit of our insights on why we chose community bonds, or why community bonds might be a good fit for your project. They are designed to be flexible, nimble, and empowering. Community bonds provided us with a path forward when qualifying for conventional financing. I say very challenging for new cooperatives in the slide, but I actually mean impossible. Conventional financing would have been impossible for us. That sort of experience of walking into your local credit union to see if they'll give you a mortgage, and well, they don't laugh you out of the office. They're very gentle about it. Um, but it is a challenge, and mostly impossible to be a new organization that's starting from $0 and zero assets and not an established track record of delivering housing, how do you build the credibility that you need? How do you raise the capital that you need to get started? A community bond can fill that role if you have, you know, a project that has a robust business plan and can move forward. You can build that credibility by pulling in community investors. Affordable housing development needs a diverse capital stack. This is kind of increasingly more important as the funding environment at both the provincial and federal level for housing gets more complex and more difficult to navigate. Um, the community bonds allowed us to set flexible terms. We could structure the offering to match the needs of the project and our ability to pay. So we were able to set relatively low interest rates. We were able to set a maturity term that we felt would suit the needs of the project. You have the flexibility to guide that. And it does in some degree reduce dependence on funder timelines and restrictions. Um, in some ways, you're trading funder timelines and restrictions for, you know, the length of time, the uncertain length of time that it will take you to raise funds from the community. But you know, as I mean, I'm just thinking of the in the last couple of weeks, the province of BC has announced that they are pausing or canceling significant amount of funding for housing development through the Community Housing Fund. It's been really devastating news for the nonprofit and co-op housing sector in BC. And you know, at the federal level, Build Canada Homes is stepping in, but they're building housing at a grand scale. And so projects like Propolis, where we're building, you know, a 50-unit apartment building, are, you know, the funding sources at the federal level are getting kind of more yeah, a little bit more complex, a little bit more challenging for groups that want to start housing co-ops. And so finding ways as an organization to reduce our dependence on government funding, which is fickle and it changes on election cycles and uh, having the option for a community bond campaign that kind of works outside of that goes directly to community and says, you know, we're folks in our community, we want to solve the housing crisis here, we want to contribute to doing that, and everyone needs to come to the table. Having a tool like this that helps us to do that is really quite valuable. Um, Community bonds are really values aligned. They keep investment dollars in the community. And we know that there's kind of a growing network of social impact investors that are looking for these type of investments. It was something, you know, that was part of the Propolis vision all along when we first founded the organization. We didn't know that community bonds existed at that time, but we really wanted for there to be a tool to you know, reach out into our community, allow people to contribute to pool their dollars and make a difference. We knew that there would be a mechanism. We didn't know what it was going to be. We scouted around for different options. We explored founding a separate investment co-op that would have been able to do this, but ultimately, when we learned that we could do the community bonds without having the kind of added labor of creating an entirely new cooperative, we decided to go this direction. So it's a really valuable mechanism to be able to have if you know, you want to keep investment dollars in the community, want to offer people a local investment where they can really see that their dollars are making a difference. Um, Community bonds are really inclusive. As I mentioned, having that low investment minimum starting at $1,000, you know, it allowed us to be very, very inclusive. Our youngest investor is 16 years old, and scraped together $1,000 of funds to support the project. And when we asked him, why he decided to support it, he said he wanted to help make the world a little bit less dystopian. Like that, I'm like, that's a really sort of stellar um, point from someone who's very young and is highly impacted by the housing crisis. We have lots of folks in our network of investors who um, want to be able to make a difference, and having an investment opportunity that feels really inclusive was really important for us. A few of the lessons learned. We were the guinea pig in Western Canada, and we were also the guinea pig in terms of offering a community bond investment for new housing development. So at the time that we started working with Tapestry prior to launching our campaign in 2023, they were doing a pilot initiative with 6 affordable housing organizations, and Propolis was the first campaign to launch out of those pilot organizations. Prior to doing that pilot, Tapestry had supported lots of community bond campaigns, but mostly in other sectors like arts and culture or solar energy or environmental projects. And so finding ways of making this work in the affordable housing world has been interesting. So, some of the lessons that we learned when structuring your bond offering, um, setting competitive interest rates in a rapidly evolving economy was really, as I mentioned earlier, this was a real puzzle for us to overcome. We had done investor consultations. Early in 2023 when we were structuring our offering and proposed those rates of 2.5 to 3.5%, and lots of people were really amenable, and at the time a GIC was lower than 3.5%, but between doing that planning work and launching the campaign, interest rates across the country um, went up rapidly. And so at the time of launching our campaign, our highest interest rate was lower than what a GIC would be. And so, um, so finding the balance between setting an interest rate that's right for the project, and something that's also going to be relatively competitive, given the economic context was challenging. Um, there is there is an option or a pathway to be able to hold community bonds within an RRSP or a TFSA. And if we could go back and do that in hindsight, I would definitely take that option. There is some degree of upfront cost in order to set up that pathway. And so we had decided not to go that road. The Propolis bonds were not RRSP eligible. But if we could go back and do it again, I would take that option because there were a number of people who would have wanted to invest with us if they could have held it within an RSP. There were some challenges that we encountered with our out-of-the-box approaches. We ended up with substantially higher legal costs to close the property purchase because of the complexity of registering a mortgage on behalf of the bondholders, and then also the 2 bridge lenders that we had in the mix. And so being sure that you're budgeting adequately for legal costs when you're doing something that are out of the box are really important. Um, yeah, as I mentioned, the additional costs and added complexity due to the bridge loans, and then also the differences in securities regulations across provinces. Um, because we were the first BC-based campaign for Tapestry, and because we were co-op located in BC, navigating what was needed in terms of being fully in compliance with securities regulations was really important, and we had to do some sort of pivoting and adapting as we went on. We were originally intending for our bonds to be on sale across Canada. But prior to launch, we had to scale that back to first launching just in BC, and then later we were able to accept some sales in Ontario. But but being sure that we were meeting all of the regulations across all of the provinces was a priority. Um, and a few more lessons learned. The team capacity is really, really, really important. Organizations need robust governance and financial systems, strong marketing and communications plans, and enthusiastic volunteers for bond sales. Um, a community bond raise, I mean, it's similar to, to doing a charitable donation capital raise. Has differences and similarities, but you really do need enthusiastic volunteers in either of those scenarios to be reaching out to folks and getting the word out. Propolis being a brand new organization, we launched ourselves publicly in the community at the same time as launching the community bond campaign. So that kind of community engagement piece was really, really important. Investor consultations are essential so that you have a good sense of who's in your community and who would be interested in investing. And I'd highly recommend building your investor prospect list and building anchor investor partnerships before launching the campaign. Um, and allowing sufficient time to educate the community about what a community bond is, especially if you're the first organization in your place to have done such a campaign. So um, yeah, I I think that I'm at the end of my presentation here. I do sort of I want to say in closing, I mean, like Propolis has some really exciting announcements that are coming up. We are at the place now where we're moving forward. We'll be moving forward with construction for our projects, hopefully later this summer. And it's been a wild ride, but it's been very fulfilling. I don't know that we've accomplished creating the replicable model that we wanted to. Um, Mostly because, in securing financing for our project, we've have realized the limitations of the available government financing for these projects, and so it sort of feels like the community bond was a great catalyst for us to become eligible and qualify to apply to finance the full cost of the project. But um, it, uh, ultimately in the end, we were still, reliant on securing financing from a major lender in order to move that forward. And so I hope that as we keep experimenting and iterating and collaborating with other cooperatives across the country and sharing our story, I hope that um, we're able to yeah, keep on being more creative and entrepreneurial in the way that we're approaching things um, and and hope for greater success for our organization in the future, but also hope that other co-ops across the country are able to join us in that experimentation process.
Thank you, Lindsay. I'm just so impressed about all the financial language you've had to learn through all of this. Like your background, like me, is like social sciences, right? But now you're like a finance person. We have a few questions if you're okay with that, Lindsay, if you have
Absolutely.
some time. John Richmond, who's interested in social impact investing, asked a couple questions about if the co-op has will the co-op have deeply affordable subsidized units?
That's a great question, John. And the answer is no, we're not planning to. Our vision with Propolis is really to sort of fill that like middle space on the housing continuum where, I mean, Kamloops has lots of amazing nonprofit housing providers that are providing social housing, supportive housing, deeply subsidized units. But Kamloops didn't have an organization that was working on building housing in that middle space for median income earners who are priced out of the housing market, or for people who have been in supportive or subsidized housing who are ready to move on and free up a space for someone else, but who can't afford to make the leap to market housing. And so our goal has been to have a consistent level of just slightly below market affordability across the board for all of our units, and you know, with the goal that middle income families are able to be supported, um, and kind of fill that middle space on the housing continuum. So no, we're not planning to have subsidized units.
Don Mowbray had a question about how you were able to pay people at the end of the 3 years. Where did you hold the bonds to ensure interest was accumulating?
Okay, so that's a great question. So the plan that we have for repaying people is to pay them out of the construction financing. So um, the we have, and yeah, we have some investors who started their investment in the summer of 2023, and so those investments come mature this summer, and we're very grateful that we have secured our construction financing in just the right amount of time to repay those folks. um, so yeah, so the with a housing development project, you need financing at the land acquisition stage. You need some pre-development financing, and then you need your construction financing. The bonds for us were what we pulled into finance at the land acquisition stage. Then we pulled in, some grants and a CMHC seed loan at the pre-development stage. And then at the construction financing stage, when we've now secured financing to move forward with the project, we will be repaying the bond investors at that time.
I
Um,
think I think that kind of covers Lana's question about can you share a bit about the project cash flow? That
mhm,
cover
mhm.
that maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. I can go a little bit more into detail about that. It's the affordable housing sector is, especially in BC, with the province just announcing, canceling the community housing fund intake, and it's very, very difficult right now. Seed funding for projects is very scarce and hard to get. I feel like, and I mean, it sort of speaks to my comments about, like, I think we haven't created a replicable model. We really, really tried, but in some ways, Propolis was doing this project just like at the tail end of, we got sort of the last bits of CMHC seed funding that were available, and that helped us. We got some pre-development funding from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Affordable Sustainable Housing Fund. We got a small sort of grant from that. We had a small pre-development grant from the Van City Foundation. So, we really, really bootstrapped the pre-development stage by pulling together very small pockets of funding from different sources. But many of those sources no longer exist, and or are out of funds, and so thinking about how we would approach that differently next time, knowing that some of those sources were, they were difficult for us to access. We got small amounts of funding from them, and then most of those funds don't exist anymore. We'll have to get even more creative about how we solve pre-development funding in the future. Um, and then thinking about the actual construction financing, we applied to the CMHC Cooperative Housing Development Program, and that fund is also, most likely coming to the conclusion of its funding cycle relatively soon. And so we hope to see funds like that replenished. But it's a very difficult environment. And so thinking about the role that the community bonds play for us, they played that very distinctive role at the land acquisition stage. But we might have to get more creative in the future and think about whether it would be suitable for community bonds to provide support at other stages of the project as well.
A few more questions. Tom Webb was asking if there's a government department in BC that regulates community bonds. How do you develop an investor list? So,
Um,
a couple questions.
Okay. So and also the part of the question about where the bonds were held to ensure the interest accumulating. I do want to answer that too, which it sort of ties in, I
Oh,
think,
sorry.
with the securities regulations. So we worked with Tapestry Community Capital, who provide administrative services to support bond providers, so Tapestry has held all of the held all of the data for our investors and have done the interest calculations and Tapestry provides support with paying out the interest for our bond providers or bondholders and calculating that interest as it accrues. So that's a really valuable administrative service that has saved our team quite a bit of time. Tapestry also prepares the T5 tax slips that are needed for our bondholders. And then Tapestry has also helped us to navigate the complex web of securities regulations and the exemptions that are within those securities regulations that allow nonprofits and cooperatives to issue community bonds. So yeah, I'm like community bonds are governed by all of the same securities regulations that for-profit companies are held to, and they're sort of, issued in much the same way, but there's language within those regulations that allows nonprofits and cooperatives to issue community bonds. But I'm gonna like not get myself into trouble by talking too much about those regulations and just be like, please talk to a securities lawyer
Yeah.
and or Tapestry Community Capital, because I'm like, budget for a securities lawyer. It is really like you can't do this unless you have someone that is helping you to navigate those regulations.
Someone asked if they could get a copy of the slides after. It's probably no problem, hey?
Absolutely, I'm happy to share. Yeah.
Um, Ken asked, within Propolis, is it a nonprofit? Yeah, it's a nonprofit housing co-op.
Yes,
Are you?
yeah, we're incorporated under the BC Cooperatives Act, and we're
Yeah.
we're a nonprofit housing co-op.
He asked a good question. Are you all volunteers, or is there some pay for the amount of heavy lifting you're doing?
That's a great question. Currently, I do have a paid role as the executive director for Propolis, um, but that's relatively recent. I stepped into this role full time as of last fall, and had like a very part-time contract for a few months before that. So most of the early years and for the full duration of the community bond campaign, we were fully volunteer, which was challenging because between myself and so my kind of primary co-founder of Propolis, Miles Pruden, we really kind of led the charge for the organization, and both Miles and I put in significant amount of volunteer time to get it off the ground. If you think you're doing this big campaign raise, but at the same time, we're building a new cooperative from scratch, setting up our financial system, setting up our policies, setting up our governance. There's really a ton of work to be done, and I'm grateful that I had the capacity to do that as a volunteer because often these initiatives don't move forward unless there is someone who can play that role for the organization. But yeah, last year we were able to secure a grant from the Vancouver Foundation that has allowed us to have to have actual capacity of having a paid employee and doing this now in a way that is much more sustainable for my own life and sanity and burnout is kind of really key. So I'm like, yes, it can be done with a volunteer team, but you have to expect that it's going to be a lot of heavy lifting. Mhm.
I knew there'd be lots of good questions. Okay, so Daniel asks how prepared you had to be to work with tapestries. Like, did you have to be incorporated, have your business plan, financial modeling done before they would like work with you, or?
Um, yes, that's a great question. I think, I mean, we were incorporated. We did have we did not have a completed business plan, but we had done some early financial modeling for the property that we were wanting to purchase. Part of, their process of working with you will kind of walk you through a feasibility study for the project. Um, but but I think I would say it would be very difficult to do that process with them in a timely way if you haven't done any business planning or financial modeling leading up to that. So, the more prepared you are going in, the more effective it's going to be to work with them.
Yeah, see a couple more questions from Anthony in Nova Scotia. They have the land for the project, but they're wondering about the suitability of community bonds for the construction phase. You have thoughts on that?
Um, okay, that's a great question. And I think that that speaks to the appetite for risk that you have as an organization, and the appetite for risk that your investors have. So, when you're using a community bond like we did for a land acquisition, we were able to mitigate risk for our investors by saying, we're going to register a mortgage against the property, and if worst case scenario, we're not able to secure financing to move forward, we can sell that property and use the proceeds of the sale to return your funds to you. So that's a sort of much lower risk ask of your investors. They have the security of knowing that the value of the investment that we're collecting from them could be returned if we weren't able to move forward and we sold the property. Um, if you're collecting community bonds to support either that pre-development stage, which is very, very risky, where you're still in the stage, you're spending a lot of money on architects and consultants, but you don't actually know yet if the project's going to be fully feasible or if you're going to secure financing. That's the most risky stage. And then the construction stage also has a number of risks that you would need to mitigate. And so um, for us, the like risk appetite that we had, we really wanted to provide our investors with a secured investment. And I think that that's, yeah, managing risks in the community bond world it's actually a real puzzle that we kind of need to solve collectively as people who are interested in doing community bond offerings, because if even one organization fails, they don't mitigate their risks adequately, you're taking money from your friends and your neighbors. If you're like a grassroots organization like us, I'm like, I knew almost everyone who invested in the campaign in the end. Um, and that responsibility to those people, to our community, and the responsibility to mitigate risk is really, really important. And if, as community bonds are becoming more popular across the country, thinking about how to be really transparent with what the transparent and accurate with what the risks really are. And when you're inviting someone to invest with you, being sure that you know who they are as an investor and you know whether they can afford to lose that investment or not. Every investment has some degree of risk, but not every investor can afford to take those risks. And so being really responsible, I'm like, yes, absolutely, you could do a community bond offering to cover the full cost of construction on your project. But can you do so in a way where you've mitigated risk for your investors? That's a question that you need to answer as an organization. And I imagine that Propolis will eventually get to the point where we have like a sufficient portfolio of projects where we can offer investors more security because we're a more established organization. If once we've got a track record of delivering what we say we're going to deliver, then I think that we'll be in a different position than when we ran our first campaign. But until we get there, it's really, really important to accurately assess those risks and to be really transparent about them.
Tom was asking about how did you develop an investor list?
That's a great question. Mostly we were super grassroots in our approach. We're a very grassroots group of folks. A number of the founding members of Propolis had worked together at the Kamloops Food Policy Council. So we were coming from the food security world. So we had, we had lots of contacts in the, community grassroots organizing network of our community. We reached out to people that we knew. We had a table at the farmers market almost every weekend during the early stages of the campaign, and we met people and we got out into the community and we did presentations to all of our Rotary groups. We we did, cold calls and emails to people in the community that we thought would be interested. We had partner organizations send out information to their email newsletter. Yeah, just pretty much. I'm like, that's about as grassroots as it gets, is like having a table at the farmers market.
One last question I see on here. From Belinda, could the cooperative purchase a performance bond to mitigate risk?
Um, I'm gonna sort of betray my ignorance. I don't actually even know what a performance bond is. So I'm like, if the question asker maybe wants to elaborate on that and let me know, I'm like, it's
Uh, so this would be um completing construction or if you're in the design stage, that you would follow through with the design. Uh, Again, we're a municipality, so we'd be on the other end where a developer, instead of giving us a letter of credit or a large sum of money to complete their works, they go to an insurance company and they'll say, if that guy goes broke, town, don't worry about it, we'll finish the project.
mhm.
And I'm just thinking out loud, it just came to me. Is that something, because you were saying the pre-development and the construction phase is very risky? Is that a way to mitigate it? If you could find an insurance company that would underwrite that risk, and I'm just
Hmm.
thinking it's
Hmm.
a possibility.
Thank you for explaining that. Yes, I am very curious if that would be, a possibility. Of course, we're working with a, general contractor on delivering the project now. We will expect them to have bonding, but whether that would be an option for us ourselves as the nonprofit co-op entity, that I don't know and have never asked that question of an insurer. So I think that we probably like let's explore that further. It's a very interesting question.
I have one last one for you. You might have touched on this. Community land trust. Was there anything in Kamloops where the municipality has some land that they would gift to you for this?
That's a great question. I actually didn't mention it in the presentation, but the city of Kamloops is contributing a small parcel of land to the project. There's an unused piece of roadway that was located directly behind the property that we purchased, and the city is giving us that land for $1, and we're consolidating it with our property. So that increases the footprint that we have available for the building, and it has been an incredible support. So yes, working with your municipality in terms of accessing land is a really, really great option. The city of Kamloops also, sort of in the last couple of years, has started the Kamloops Community Land Trust, where they are intending to, at some point in the future, have municipally owned lands that are made available to the community for affordable housing development through that entity. And I am actually a board director on the board of the Kamloops Community Land Trust. So it's a slow process starting up an organization like that, and so it's still very early in its progress. And the Kamloops Community Land Trust has in partnership with the city of Kamloops announced its first project, but the organization is still just getting started, and it's not actually yet in a position to like partner with other organizations. In some ways, the Propolis model functions a little bit like a land trust, because we do have the intention to develop more housing over time. We have an incorporation structure where we have a Propolis, we call it the Propolis mothership, as a nonprofit co-op, but it will have has separate land holding cooperatives operating as subsidiaries underneath Propolis, so that each subsequent project that we do will be held in its own subsidiary co-op, and that provides sort of some legal kind of segregation of risk as we move forward with different projects that we're building. So, so the Propolis as an organization that will have kind of multiple sites, there's some sort of crossovers there with the ethos of what a land trust would set out to do. And so I guess I think that both housing cooperatives and land trusts, they're each kind of like different tools and structures, and but there's also some like gray areas, and an overlap between the ethos of each of what those structures are aiming to do. So I think it's important to be really collaborative across cooperatives and land trusts, but it's also valuable to be kind of open-minded about the like blurry edges between what gets called a cooperative and what gets called a land trust, and where the overlap is between those things.
I feel like your team has spoken with every organization, reached out to every little thing you could. Was it a team of like five or six of you, or how many was it?
We had 8 founding members for the cooperative, and with sort of myself and Miles Pruden, who's the owner of Next Build Construction, and I had some experience in the nonprofit sector and community organizing. Miles had some experience as a small developer, and so we kind of pooled our knowledge and skill sets, and had some really incredible co-founding volunteers along with us, and we've been yeah, growing our team in a fairly organic way. Most housing co-ops only allow resident members, but Propolis, we've structured our cooperative to allow what we call Friends of Propolis members as well, so that we have just some, yeah, really dedicated community champions who don't plan to live in a Propolis building, but really want to see the housing come to life. So we've got those folks in the membership fold as well.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for your time. I think I'm so impressed. I think it's going to inspire others across Canada. Maybe we'll see what happens. I will make sure to share the slides and the video with everybody tomorrow or something. I'll send it out to everybody. And yeah, thanks so much, Lindsay. Good luck with the next phases of your movement here.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. I've just dropped my email address into the chat, so if folks want to reach out to me, we take it really seriously to cooperate and support other cooperatives. So if there's ever any way that we can support or answer questions specific to your project, please do reach out. Um, Although please be gracious with me if I'm slow to respond, because I am deep in the weeds of getting a construction ready project going this summer. So I'm juggling lots of things, but it's really important to me that we share the knowledge that we have with other folks in the co-op sector.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Take care, everybody.